There is a smell that belongs to Sunday morning in a black household in the 1960s. Not one smell, a combination. Bacon grease warming in the pan before anything else touches it. Coffee percolating on the back eye. Not the front, never the front. The front was for serious cooking. And underneath all of it, underneath the bacon and the coffee and whatever was already soaking from the night before, there was something else. Something harder to name. The smell of intention. The smell of a woman who had already been awake for 2 hours before her husband opened his eyes, who had already washed her hands twice, who had already thought through every dish she was going to make and in what order and why, and wasn't going to be rushed by a single soul in that house. That woman was Big Mama, or she was your grandmother, or she was your great aunt who never had children of her own, but treated that kitchen like it was her life's work, because it was. And she had rules. Not written down rules. Not rules she sat you down and explained to you. Rules you learned by watching, by being handed a wooden spoon and told to stir, and figuring out real quick that you had better not stop stirring until she said to. Rules that had been passed from her mother to her, and were supposed to be passed from her to you, except somewhere along the way, the passing stopped. The daughters got busy. The granddaughters didn't come to the kitchen anymore, and the rules started going quiet. That is why we're here today, family. Because Big Mama's kitchen had a logic to it, and that logic is worth remembering. Not just for the food, for everything it teaches about patience and care, and the right way to do something when nobody is watching but you. Hey family, I'm James. And today we're going back into that kitchen, the one on the linoleum floor with the curtains in the window and the cast iron on the stove. And we're talking about the 25 rules Big Mama kept that nobody teaches their daughters anymore. Now, if this is your first time finding us, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button and ring that bell, because every week we come back here and we remember. And you don't want to miss a single one of these. Go on, subscribe. And let's get into it. Now, Big Mama's kitchen had a rhythm, and that rhythm ran from before the sun came up to after the last dish was put away at night. So, we're going to walk through her day. We're going to follow the rules in the order she kept them, because the order mattered too. That was a rule all by itself. Number 1, she started the night before. This is the first rule, and it may be the most important one, because it means Big Mama's Sunday cooking didn't begin on Sunday. It began on Saturday evening, when most of the household was watching television or getting ready for bed. She would already be in that kitchen, sorting through the dried beans with her fingers, picking out any that didn't belong, and setting them to soak in a bowl of cold water that would sit on the counter overnight. She would already be taking out the meat she needed and thinking through what needed to thaw and what needed to marinate. She would already be thinking about the cornbread, whether she had enough meal, whether she needed to ask the girls to run to the store in the morning before it got late. The kitchen was not an emergency for Big Mama. It was a plan, and the plan started the night before, quietly, without any announcement. Number 2. The first thing on the stove was always the thing that took the longest. Nobody taught Big Mama kitchen math in school, but she knew it better than anyone who had ever studied it. When she walked into that kitchen on Sunday morning, the very first thing she did, before she touched an egg, before she made a biscuit, before she even fixed her own coffee, was get the low and slow things started. The neck bones went on. The black-eyed peas that had been soaking all night went into the pot. The pot roast, if there was one, went into the oven on low before the sun had fully come up. Because Big Mama understood something that took people decades to relearn. The dishes that needed the most time needed to start first, and they needed to start early, and they could not be rushed into readiness. Patience wasn't a virtue in Big Mama's kitchen. It was a technique. Number 3. The cast iron was never ever washed with soap. This was not optional. This was law. If you picked up that bottle of dish soap and walked toward her cast iron skillet, Big Mama would look at you with an expression that required no words at all. That seasoning, the black, almost lacquered surface on the inside of that pan, had been built up over years, decades in some cases. It was built with oil and heat and use and care. Soap would strip it. Hot water and a stiff brush was all the pan needed. Wipe dry immediately, and then a thin coat of grease or oil rubbed in, while the pan was still warm, so the next time it came out of the cabinet, it was already ready. Some of those skillets had been in the family since before Big Mama herself was born. She was not about to let dish soap end what had survived that long. Number 4. Lard first. Always. Before the butter. Before the vegetable oil. Before anything that came in a spray can that didn't exist yet. Big Mama started with lard, not because she didn't have options, because lard did something for cornbread and biscuits and pie crust that nothing else replicated. It made the layers, it made the flake, it made the tenderness that you bit into, and couldn't quite explain except to say it tasted like the real thing, because it was. The switch away from lard happened gradually, when the word cholesterol started showing up in magazines and doctors started making pronouncements, and families started buying Crisco and calling it progress. Big Mama may have switched too, eventually. But the oldest of the rules, the ones that came down from the furthest back, said, start with lard. And those biscuits said she was right. Number 5, you don't season once. You season all the way through. This is where a lot of cooking falls apart. Someone makes a dish, tastes it at the end, decides it needs salt, and adds it at the end. And it tastes like a dish with salt added at the end. Big Mama seasoned in layers. She seasoned the meat before it went into the pot. She seasoned the pot when the aromatics went in. She seasoned again when the liquid was added. She tasted at every stage, not to adjust, but to confirm. Seasoning at the end, she would tell you, without telling you very much, was what people did when they hadn't been paying attention. Seasoning all the way through was what people did when they respected the food they were making. Number 6. The wooden spoon was never put in the sink while something was cooking. It stayed on the counter, or across the top of the pot, or in her hand. But it did not go in the sink. The sink was for things that were done. A wooden spoon in the sink while the pot was still on the stove meant someone had walked away from their responsibility. And Big Mama did not walk away from a pot that needed tending. The spoon on the counter was a signal to everyone in the kitchen. This is still alive. This still needs someone. Don't touch it, and don't assume it's finished. Number 7. You don't open the oven unless you know why. Children learn this early, not from a lecture. From the look they got the first time they cracked the oven door out of curiosity when biscuits were inside. Because opening the oven for no reason let the heat escape, and lost heat meant uneven rising, and uneven rising meant biscuits that didn't come out right. And biscuits that didn't come out right on a Sunday morning were a disappointment that affected the entire table. Big Mama would say, and you could hear this in her voice even when she wasn't raising it, if you don't have a reason to open that oven, then you don't have a reason to open that oven. It sounds simple. It was simple. But it was discipline applied to curiosity, and that combination is rarer than people think. Number 8. Never crowd the skillet. This was a frying rule, and it was inviolable. When Big Mama was frying chicken, or pork chops, or fish on a Friday, or anything else that needed that direct contact with hot oil, she did not put more pieces in the pan than the pan could properly hold, because crowding the skillet dropped the oil temperature, and dropped oil temperature meant the meat started to steam instead of fry, and steamed fried chicken had a soft crust that didn't crunch, and a soft crust was not fried chicken. It was something else, something less. Big Mama would fry in batches, keeping the finished pieces warm in the oven while she worked through the rest, never sacrificing the quality of what was in the pan for the sake of speed. The patience required to fry properly was the same patience required to do almost anything properly. Now, family, let me stop here for just a second. We're walking through Big Mama's kitchen today, her rules, her ways, and I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, what's one thing your grandmother did in the kitchen that nobody in your family does anymore? One rule, one habit, one move that you watched her make and never quite figured out how to replicate. Put it in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, somebody out there is going to read your comment and say, that's exactly what my Big Mama did too. And these recipes, the ones we're talking about, the wisdom behind them, that is exactly why I put together the Soul Roots Cookbook. 100 forgotten Black American recipes, written out the way Big Mama would have done it. Complete, patient, with every ingredient measured and every tip included. The link is in the description and it's pinned right there in the comments. You can scan the code on your screen right now if you're watching on TV. Don't let these recipes stay lost. Number 9. Grease the pan before the oven gets hot, not after. Before. This meant the grease had time to melt into the pan evenly, so by the time the batter went in, the pan was already prepared all the way to the edges. This produced that crust on the bottom of the cornbread. The dark, slightly crunchy crust that people who didn't know better thought was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was the whole point. It was the part the children would fight over. And it only happened if you greased the pan early and let it go into the oven with the heat. Number 10. Taste everything before you serve it. Every single time. Even dishes Big Mama had made 500 times. Even the mac and cheese whose recipe she could have made with her eyes closed. Even the potato salad she had been making since before your mama was born. She tasted everything before it hit the table. Because tasting wasn't about checking whether she remembered the recipe. Tasting was about confirming that what was in the bowl matched what she intended. That the seasoning was right, that the texture was right, that it was worthy of the table. A cook who doesn't taste before serving, she seemed to believe, is a cook who isn't really paying attention. And Big Mama was always paying attention. Number 11. The good dishes came out on Sunday. Period. During the week, the household ate off the everyday plates. The ones that had small chips on the edges from years of use. The ones that didn't quite match anymore because 2 or 3 of them had broken over the years. But on Sunday, the good dishes came down from the cabinet shelf. The ones that were wrapped in cloth to keep them from getting dusty. The ones that had been a wedding gift, or had come from an aunt's house after she passed. Using the good dishes on Sunday wasn't pretension. It was an act of saying, this meal is an occasion. The people at this table are worth the occasion, even if it was just family, especially if it was just family. Number 12. No one sits down at the table until the blessing is said. This rule required no enforcement by the time children were old enough to know the kitchen. It had been observed so many times that it became instinct. You didn't pull out the chair. You didn't pick up the fork. You didn't reach for the bread basket. You stood or bowed your head where you were standing if there wasn't enough room at the table. And you waited, and Granddaddy said the blessing, or Big Mama said it herself, or whoever was the elder in the room said it, and everybody else was quiet. Because the food on that table didn't come from nowhere, and Big Mama intended for you to remember that. Number 13. Clean as you go. This was the rule that separated a cook who understood the kitchen from one who was just cooking. Big Mama did not let her workspace become chaos. While something was simmering and didn't need her hands, she was wiping the counter. While the biscuits were in the oven, she was washing the bowl she'd used to mix them. By the time the meal was finished cooking and on the table, the kitchen was already mostly clean. Post-meal cleanup was manageable because pre-meal cleanup had already been happening all morning. A clean workspace, she demonstrated every single Sunday without saying it out loud, meant you could think clearly and move clearly and nothing got left behind or forgotten. Number 14. Butter goes on the bread after it comes off the heat. Not before. Cornbread, biscuits, rolls, whatever the bread was that Sunday, you didn't split it open and butter it while it was still in the pan or fresh out of the oven. You let it come to the table. You split it there. The butter went on at the table, partly because that was the right sequence. Partly because putting butter on bread before it reached the table was jumping ahead. And jumping ahead in Big Mama's kitchen suggested you didn't trust the process enough to let it unfold the way it was supposed to. Number 15. The pot liquor was not thrown away. This was non-negotiable. The liquid left in the pot after the collard greens cooked down. Dark green, deeply seasoned, carrying everything that had cooked out of those greens and whatever ham hock or smoked turkey had been in there with them. That liquid was precious. It could be sopped up with cornbread, which was its highest calling. It could be drunk straight from a cup by the elders, which happened without embarrassment. It could be saved and used as the base for the next pot of beans or greens. But it was never poured down the drain. Never. Because pot liquor was the most concentrated thing that came out of that whole cooking process, and throwing it away would have been like throwing away the lesson and keeping only the textbook. Number 16. You don't reheat something twice. If it came out of the refrigerator and got heated up, it was eaten. What wasn't eaten went back cold. It did not get heated up again a second time the next day, at least not in Big Mama's kitchen. Partly this was food safety, though she wouldn't have used that phrase. Partly it was quality. She had taken care to cook that food right the first time. Reheating it twice was an insult to the original effort. There was usually enough food that this rule could be maintained. Big Mama cooked with abundance on purpose. Leftovers were expected. Being heated twice was not. Now, family, you've stayed with me through most of this video, And that tells me something. It tells me you understand what we're doing here. That these rules weren't just about cooking. They were about the kind of care that used to be ordinary in black households. Ordinary and now rare. I know some of you are thinking, I'll ask my auntie about this. I'll call my mama. I'll write this down one of these days. Family, I have been doing this long enough to know that one of these days has a way of never arriving. That is exactly why I built the Soul Roots Cookbook, 100 forgotten Black American recipes, written out completely with every tip and every secret that Big Mama kept in her head for 70 years. You can keep trying to remember alone, or you can have it all in one place, written down the right way, ready when you need it. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. The code is on your screen. I did my part. The rest is yours, family. Number 17. Sugar in the cornbread was a personal matter. This rule was actually a rule about respecting other households. Big Mama had her position, and depending on what part of the South she came from, that position was firm. Some families made their cornbread without a single grain of sugar in it, and they would tell you plainly that sweet cornbread wasn't cornbread at all. It was cake. Other families put a spoonful of sugar in and didn't apologize for it. But what Big Mama's kitchen taught was this. You don't correct someone else's cornbread in their house. You don't wrinkle your nose. You don't announce your preferences when you are a guest. You eat what you're given. You compliment what deserves complimenting. And you keep your opinions about sugar in cornbread between yourself and your own kitchen. Hospitality runs both directions. The host doesn't apologize for the food, and the guest doesn't criticize it. Number 18. Left hand on the pot handle when you stir, not to stir with it, to hold. Because a pot on the stove moves if you're only working with one hand, and a moving pot is a spilled pot, and a spilled pot is a burn, a ruined dish, a wasted morning of work, and possibly an injury. Big Mama kept one hand on the handle and one hand working, and she kept both wrists wrapped in a dish towel that she carried over her shoulder or tucked into her apron string. This wasn't technique she learned from a cooking class. It was technique she learned from a burn she'd gotten once before, or from watching someone else get burned. The kitchen had its dangers, and the rules that kept you safe inside it were as important as the rules that kept the food right. Number 19. Children in the kitchen were there to learn, not to be entertained. This one requires some explanation because it's easy to misread. Big Mama wasn't harsh about having children in the kitchen. She wanted them there, but she wanted them there with intention. A child standing in the kitchen doorway watching television through the opening that led to the living room was not learning anything. A child who was given a task, stir this, peel those, wash those greens under the cold water, and pick through them for stems. That child was learning. The task was the lesson. The lesson was never announced. You did not know you were being taught until 10 or 15 years later, when you found yourself in your own kitchen and your hands knew something your brain couldn't explain. That's what Big Mama was building, muscle memory, inherited competence. The kind of knowing that doesn't come from a recipe card. Number 20. You never leave a house without feeding whoever came in. This was a kitchen rule that extended beyond the kitchen. If someone came to Big Mama's door, family, neighbor, someone from the church, somebody's child she barely knew, and it was anywhere near a mealtime, or anywhere near a snack time, or anywhere near any time at all, they were offered something. A plate if there was a meal going, a biscuit and some preserves if not, a piece of pound cake, a glass of sweet tea at minimum. You did not let a person come through your door and go back out it without being fed. This was not optional generosity. It was mandatory hospitality. It was the belief, held without needing to be stated, that your home was a place of provision, and if you had provision, you shared it. Simple as that. Number 21. The stove was cleaned before you went to bed. That night. Not the next morning, not the next afternoon. That night, before Big Mama laid down, the stove was wiped. The burners were clean. The grease that had spattered during frying was addressed. Not left to harden overnight, not to be dealt with tomorrow when you had more energy. Because tomorrow you would cook again, and you would cook better on a clean stove than on one with yesterday's work still on it. And because the stove was the heart of the kitchen, and you don't leave the heart of something dirty and unattended and expect the next day to go well. Number 22. Never apologize for your food at your own table. Big Mama did not say, "I hope this turned out all right," when she set the plate down. She did not say, "I don't know if the chicken is as good as last time." She did not apologize for the biscuits or the greens or the mac and cheese. She had cooked it with care. She had tasted it. She had made it the right way. What she put on that table was what she intended to put there. Apologizing for it before anyone had tasted it was a kind of unmaking. It suggested doubt, and doubt at the table affects how people receive the food. Big Mama set the dish down like she knew exactly what it was. That confidence was itself an ingredient. Number 23. The leftover food was spoken for before it left the kitchen. At the end of the meal, when the family was helping clear the table and the food was being gathered up and covered and put away, Big Mama already knew where it was going. This bowl of potato salad was going home with somebody's family because they'd had a hard week. This piece of cake was set aside for the neighbor who hadn't been well. This container of greens was going to whoever had come furthest to be there. The distribution of abundance was not random. It was deliberate. Big Mama knew who needed what, and the food moved accordingly. This was also a lesson about looking up from your own plate long enough to see who around you might need something that you have. Number 24. Recipes were not written down because they were not meant to be passive. This sounds counterintuitive until you understand the philosophy behind it. Big Mama's recipes lived in her hands and her memory, not on paper. And there was a reason for that. A recipe on paper can be followed without understanding. A recipe held in the body requires you to pay attention to the look of the batter, to the sound of the grease, to the weight of the dough in your hands that tells you whether it needs more flour or more water. Big Mama taught by doing, and she expected you to learn by watching and by doing alongside her. The recipe wasn't the point. The knowledge was the point. And knowledge of that kind doesn't transfer through a card in a recipe box. It transfers through presence, through years of Sunday mornings in that kitchen, through the repetition that turns watching into understanding and understanding into something your hands just know. This is also why writing these things down now matters so much, family, because the present stopped happening. The Sunday mornings got scattered, the repetition got interrupted. And what Big Mama carried in her hands has to be translated now into something that can be held, which is exactly what the Soul Roots Cookbook is trying to do. Number 25. You always cooked more than you needed. This was the last rule, and in some ways, the most profound one. Big Mama never made just enough. She made enough, and then more. Because life was unpredictable, and people showed up unannounced, and someone always forgot they were hungry until they smelled the food cooking, and then they were hungry. Because you never wanted a guest to feel like they had eaten the last of something, or that their being there had diminished what was available. Because generosity at the table was a form of dignity. It said, "There is plenty here, and you are welcome to it, and your presence has not cost us anything." Abundance on the table was an act of love made visible. And Big Mama understood, in some deep way that she never had to articulate, that love needed to be made visible. It needed to be smelled and tasted and seen. Otherwise, it was just an intention, and intentions don't fill anybody up. Now, family, let me ask you something real quick before we close out. Hit that like button if this brought back something real for you. And subscribe, because next week we're going right back into this kitchen and we're not stopping anytime soon. Drop a comment and tell me, what's one rule your grandmother kept in the kitchen that you've never seen written down anywhere? Tell me. I want to know. I need to know. And I know somebody else is going to read what you write and feel less alone about what they lost. And share this one. Not just with anybody. Share it with the person in your family whose hands still know how to do this. The aunt who still makes the sweet potato pie from memory. The mama who still seasons in layers. The cousin who still has Big Mama's cast iron and actually uses it. Send it to them and tell them we said thank you. Subscribe, because next week we're going somewhere just as important as today. And I'll say it now, the way I always end, these rules were never written down because Big Mama expected to be there to teach them. She expected the kitchen to keep being a place where one generation watched another and learned. What happened instead? The distance, the busyness, the slow disappearance of Sunday as a sacred thing. She didn't see that coming. Not exactly. But I think some part of her knew. I think that's why she cooked the way she did. Abundantly, patiently, deliberately, as if she was trying to make the lessons last as long as possible. Those lessons are still here, family. We just have to choose to remember them. I'll see you next time, family.